So far, Mega Man X is having an amazing run. Both of the first two games are solid entries for different reasons, and newcomers will have no issues jumping in if either of those two games became their starting point. But that whole thing changes once we enter X3 territory. See, Capcom's approach to the third game was to make it more challenging so players would not grow bored with these games so far, plus they designed X3 with the assumption that you've already played the other two. So while X1 and 2 are the equivalent of stepping into a boxer's ring where you're being trained where the sessions are progressively becoming more intense, X3 is where they not only took the gloves off, the game will deck you right in the face and continue to pummel you while you're down. This is the unforgiving yet overcooked entry that is Mega Man X3. Our story begins right at the end of Sigma's rebellion thanks to the efforts of X and Zero. But our Reploid heroes are not out of the woods yet. Mavericks were still going berserk due to the remnants of the Sigma virus infecting anyone it can possess until a genius named Dr. Doppler stepped in and created a cure that was effective against the Sigma virus. He even found a way to neutralize the Maverick behavior and cause the Reploids to return to normal. Peace had finally returned, and many of those reformed Mavericks along with volunteering Reploids founded a utopia named Doppler Town, with Dr. Doppler leading them all to a new era of peace. But we all know how this goes, especially in the world of Mega Man where Peace likes to go on long vacations, since those reformed Mavericks began to riot out of nowhere after a few months. Turns out the cure was not really all that's cracked up to be, and the Maverick Hunters found out that Dr. Doppler was the one who was pulling the strings. So they sent X and Zero out there to quell the Mavericks permanently if they have to, and make the Doppler answer for his crimes. Right in the opening act, we're thrown into the middle of the action where X and Zero have to defend the Hunter base from these Maverick attacks, with the scenario being more dynamic than the last game. But aside from that spectacle, the intro stage doesn't really have that much to teach you. You already know how X functions, and his controls are exactly the same as before, though now his fully charged Buster Shots is given an even more flashier look. However, once we reach a certain point, this dude named Mac shows up, and according to the dialogue here, Mac is supposed to be an ally. Unfortunately, it turns out he's a traitor and manages to capture X before taking him away. X, my boy, I thought we were over this. You mean to tell me after all we've been through in X2, you had to get caught by this loser? But right on cue, the hunter who needs no introduction, Mr. Show Stealer is here in full effect, complete with his brand new theme and farming those badass points like he always does. Except he ain't moving too much. Or at all, rather. Well, hold on. If you look to your left and notice a massive health bar with a Z emblem where an X is supposed to be, and after a few button presses later, this is when you discover that you are in full control of Mr. Show Stealer this time, and it's up to you to save your best friend. Back when I experienced this for the first time, I remembered yelling at the top of my lungs from the excitement of being able to play as Zero and wield the same power he had that saved X in the previous games. Of course, I got in trouble for making that much noise, but that's neither here or there. The point is, we got to play as one of the best characters that stepped into this franchise for the first time, and we get to save X while we're at it. Best part is, this isn't the only time we get to play as him, but I'm gonna save those details for later. This is how you make a good impression on your can opener. Having us thinking there's nothing left to show off only to hit us with a moment like this will surely have us wanting more out of this game. Not to mention, the stage opens up with a really good banger as always. Once you cleared that intro and made it to the stage select screen, this is where the real game begins. As I said in the beginning, X3 is where it stops pulling its punches, cause no matter which stage you select, you are going to have one hell of a time. X cannot take a lot of punishment from almost anything this game is going to throw at him, because for some reason his default body has been downgraded to aluminum material. So certain attacks that you should be able to tank will deal way more damage than you would anticipate and will lead to a lot of unexpected death. breaths. And while X's charge shot has a new flashier look, it didn't take long for me to realize that it's more efficient to use your regular buster on certain enemies instead of charging them. This is mainly because a majority of the enemies in this game are packing way more health than you would expect, enough for them to take a fully charged buster shot to the face and carry on like nothing happened. Additionally, some enemies like this ball and chain robo will have certain hitboxes that will block your charge shots entirely, so you're much better off spamming lemons instead of taking the time to charge them up. This is why most players will often make it their priority to upgrade X as quickly as possible so the game doesn't continue to put their face in the dirt at every turn, especially with how frail X is going to be for the majority of the game. But if things get too dicey for X to handle, he can always rely on Zero. Sort of. For the first time, our favorite Red Warrior is playable, but he does come with a number of limitations. You can summon him almost at any point in the pause menu, and his controls are no different than what X is already able to do. From the start, Zero is already packing way more health than X, letting him take more hits. He can also charge his buster up to 4 stages, letting him perform his double charge buster combo from X2, and his last charge is a single swing of the Z-Saber that can one-shot just about any enemy you've come across. But this is as far as Zero's kit goes, since he doesn't have any additional mobility options or special techniques of his own. So what about those limitations I mentioned earlier? Well, for one, he cannot grab any upgrades at all, and you have to be in control of X when you find any of them. Zero will also dip anytime you clear a section of the stage, as you can't use him during boss fights of any kind, and he's usually a once and done occasion until you've cleared the rest of the stage on your own. So the time you get to spend with him will be short, but the biggest detriment when playing as Zero is what happens when you lose a life while he's active. Zero won't die, but he'll spend the rest of the game chilling at the hunter base for repairs, locking you out of the best upgrades you can get later on, as well as the best ending for the game. See, playing Zero here is very much like renting a Lamborghini. It's flashy and quite the spectacle to have at your fingertips, but if you crash that sucker in any way, your renting days are done. Besides, the novelty of playing as Zero will wear off quick, since X will eclipse him in every way once he gets his upgrades. Still, it is very nice of Capcom to finally let us play as him, even though it's in short bursts. Alright, I've brought up X's upgrades a good number of times by now, so let's talk about that. You already know what the hard and sub tanks do, and as you can expect, X has a brand new set of armor to play with. Starting with his boots, X is able to air dash like he did in 2, but now he's given the ability to dash upward, allowing X to have what is the equivalent of a double jump. This is easily my favorite boot upgrade out of all of the boots in the 16-bit trilogy. His chest piece will reduce the damage by half, then it will briefly deploy a shield around him for additional protection anytime he takes damage. It may not sound like much, but trust me, that overshield does come in clutch when it really matters. The head upgrade will continue to reduce your weapon usage by half, and it also comes with an upgraded version of the radar system from X2. Now whenever you start a stage, X will display the entire stage layout and reveal hidden collectibles you hadn't gained yet, plus it's also going to tell you what power-ups you're missing in the stage select screen. A massive improvement overall. However, I can't say the same for the arm parts. Just like in 2, the arm upgrades will give X the ability to fire 2 fully charged busters. However, if you double tap them, you can cause the charge shots to overlap and release what is called a cross charge shot. Doing this will cause your buster shots to spread apart and cover a massive area, with each of these projectiles dealing the same amount of damage as a regular fully charged buster. On paper, this does sound like it should be a really good upgrade, but I hate it using this thing. For one, you can't combo your shots like you did in X2. You have to purposely delay your shots if you don't want them to overlap. Even if you did manage to hit an enemy with iframes with your second shot, it wouldn't matter since they do not ignore iframes anymore. Second, these charge shots will often turn X into a sitting duck, as his recovery time after firing is slightly longer than how it was in X2. I was reduced to mere target practice for the Mavericks a number of times because this happened, and since the damage isn't increased at all, a good chunk of the grunt enemies can take these shots to the face or none at all depending on what you're shooting at. In case you hadn't figured it out, I really hate these guys. The only good perk this weapon has is that the multiple shots will make it easier to hit certain things, especially on mini bosses. But aside from that, this is a downgrade compared to what you had in X2. Is it the worst arm upgrade? We shall see when I eventually cover the other games. But hey, at least you can still charge your boss weapons happens with it. I will say, however, out of all the armors we've talked about so far, X3 has the best design in my opinion. It's here where the armor started to become more Gundam-like in their appearance, especially since X3's armor heavily reminds me of the Shining Gundam. Not only that, but I also dig how well his sprite turned out once the armor pieces are fully assembled. The armor upgrades don't end there. They could become even stronger if you were to seek out their chips. Just like the armor pieces, there are 4 other hidden capsules that contain special chips with the ability to upgrade certain traits of X's armor depending on which ones you get, such as letting X air dash twice or recovering health by standing still. But there is a catch. X can only equip one of these at a time, and unless you're playing the PS1 version, you can't switch between them and experiment. So before you go ham and seek them out, you may want to consider which chip upgrade appeals to you the most. Or you can just completely ignore them and go for the secret chip that is found in the first Doppler stage. Doing that will give you all 4 of the upgrades, but now X looks like he fell into an oversized pan of mac and cheese.
No, 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 no.
Bandai had the right idea in making his arms, legs, and certain parts of his armor a different color with the model kit back then. Just keep in mind that when you do seek out the hyper chip that isn't hard to locate, make sure you're at full health, you have every upgrade, and make sure you don't have a single one of those chips equipped, otherwise it will not appear. By the way, we're still not done with them collectibles yet. The ride armors will make a return, and it's safe to say that they are a reoccurring staple within the series. However, unlike X1 and 2 where the ride armors are chilling out in the open on certain stages, you have to find them on your own before you can even use them. There's 4 different ride armors in total, these 4 being the Chimera, which is the first one you must locate, and you can't use the others unless you've unlocked this one, the Frog, which gives you full mobility underwater, the Eagle with a useful flight ability, and the Kangaroo if you want to pack an extra punch. You'll be able to board these ride armors once you find this special platform that will allow you to pick from any of the 4, and if you happen to lose them or they blow up once their health is fully depleted, you can always come back and grab another. By the way, did you know that if you were to jump into the water with any of your armors that's not the Frog, they will short circuit and outright blow up? Neither did I until I was recording for this video. While I appreciate the game's attempt at doing something different with the ride armors, my 2 biggest issues is the fact that you can't use any of these armors unless you get the Chimera first, which never made sense to me, and I felt like all of the armors here were underutilized. The only time you're ever going to find yourself using any of these ride armors is to gain access to a collectible you otherwise can't reach. Then right after that, the armors will become negligible. Personally, I say the game will be better without all this extra stuff and go right back to using the formula where the ride armors just sat out in the open for the players to use as they see fit, then reward them for thinking outside of the box if they use the ride armors a certain way instead of turning them into a collectible that is forgotten later. With all that being said, it is very easy to say that X3 has a lot going for it as this game is packed with plenty of things to do. Aside from making sure that I don't end up becoming scrap metal at the hands of these regular minions, one of the challenging aspects X3 has going for it is figuring out what is the most optimal pathing one can take when getting every collectible in the game. Because I'm going to tell you right now, if you think going after these collectibles while keeping the boss weakness order in mind is the way to go, you're going to be in for a route that will involve a tremendous amount of backtracking. That is because going by the weakness order will cause you to miss out on plenty of upgrades along the way since you need a majority of these tools to get them in the first place. For example, if you want to get the Heart Tank and Gravity Beetle stage, you need to defeat Blast Hornet first since it's the only way these crates will disappear. By the way, the game will not tell you this at all or give you any hints as to why this is the case. Another example I can give you is the fact that you need Tunnel Rhino's weapon in order to access several areas that contain hidden goodies. Do you really want to wait until you've taken out Toxic Seahorse before getting such a crucial weapon? Or just make him your first visit along with Blizzard Buffalo so you have a powerful opening from the start? Like always, this is entirely up to you. It's just that now you need to decide what is more important, which is to either have an easier time taking down the Mavericks with their weaknesses, or prioritizing upgrades so you can increase X's survivability with as little backtracking as possible. If you ask me, I always prioritize his survivability just because of the fact that the enemies will have no problem sending you to the scrapyard this time around. Now, as for the level designs in X3, there isn't too much to say about them as they pretty much carried over all the improvements that were made in X2. A good chunk of them, structure and presentation wise, does a great job at highlighting X's abilities and continues to test the player's mastery over X's movement. But on the other hand, there's a select few that had moments where the pacing was either slowed down or had designs that felt like they were just there. This is because some of the stages lacked a good deal of identity that made them stand out, and I low-key struggled to remember some of the layouts for that reason alone. Stages like Blizzard, Tunnel, Toxic, and Volt had characteristics that I can reference like the back of my hand, either due to their memorable aesthetics or unique stage mechanics. While others like Blast, Gravity, Crush, and Neon don't exactly do enough for me from a design perspective. Crush at the very least had a cool moment where you destroy a facility and cause the entire structure to fall over, forcing you to climb up vertically in order for you to complete the stage, which is a nice callback to the action set pieces we had in X2. But aside from that, I just found the layouts to be boring with annoying enemies to make up for the lack of a good level here. But I would gladly put up with that instead of one of these awful sections in the later Doppler stages where you need to ride these snails up this shaft full of spikes, and as you can expect from a snail, these guys will travel very slowly. This is made even worse if you happen to fall off and need to start all over. But at the very least, you can rest easy knowing that X3 has a solid spread of music you'll hear throughout the game. Yeah, some of these tracks can loop a bit sooner than we'd like, but how can we get hung up over a hiccup like that when you've got this playing in the background? But while we're blasting our way through the main Maverick areas or fighting tooth and nail not to get cooked depending on who you are, there's a chance you'll be ambushed by the Nightmare Police, Bit and Bite. This is a gimmick that is similar to the X-Hunters in 2, but unlike the trio where you must seek them out in order to fight them, these two can show up and deliver the smoke whether you want it or not once you've entered these empty boss rooms in the middle of the stage. Worst part is, these guys are no pushovers either, so if you aren't prepared to deal with them by the time they show up, you can expect your life counter to drop tremendously with these two, especially when Bite hits you with the 3-piece and a biscuit combo. Man, I would hate to see the damage output on that sucker with no armor on. Now at first, I thought this was random, but after replaying this game numerous times, I learned that Bit will always show up during your 3rd to 5th stages, while Bite will always appear during your 6th to 8th stages. This would also explain why Bite did not show himself until the very last Maverick stage in one of my runs, despite me being more than ready for him at the time. Depending on who you are, this is something that will either excite you because of the surprise difficulty spike out of nowhere, or frustrate you to hell for this exact reason, as I spoke with a number of people who gave varying opinions on these two. However, they are tied to a unique feature in X3, something these games don't repeat too often. If you were to defeat Bit and Bite with their weaknesses, you'll end up changing the boss you'll fight against in the first Doppler stage, since defeating them with their weaknesses will permanently destroy them. However, if you leave even one of these two alive, you'll end up fighting against a boss where the both of them will combine their powers and hit you with that "we fuse, you lose" energy. There is a third member of the Nightmare Police that is optional to take down, unlike the other two. If you stumble upon a hidden teleporter, you'll be sent to an abandoned factory where you'll face off against Vile, who was rebuilt by the Doppler. Just like Bit and Bite, defeating him with his weakness will permanently destroy him, and you'll know you've done it right when his dialogue gets slower as his life is fading away. Plus, once you've defeated him, you'll get hit with a Metroid treatment and need to escape the factory before it self-destructs. Permanently destroying Vile will give you a different stage layout in Doppler Stage B, complete with an underwater section and a different set of bosses. If you don't destroy Vile or simply not encounter him at all, that same Doppler stage will be heavily damaged thanks to Vile going on a rampage, and you'll be fighting him in an even stronger version of his ride armor known as the Goliath. This is something that I really liked about X3, where your choices impacted how the rest of the game is going to turn out later and gives you a strong incentive to run through the game multiple times for that reason. Since I brought up the Nightmare Police, how are the rest of the Mavericks? Some of the main Mavericks are surprisingly challenging in a way, especially when they change up their pattern on a dime and catch you off guard if you're not prepared. I was expecting someone like Tunnel Rhino to, you know, do what rhinos would normally do and charge back and forth with groundbreaking impact, only for him to stop mid-dash and zone me out with his projectiles. This forced me to stay on my toes for the rest of the battle, especially when his desperation attacks come into play. There are other bosses in the game with similar tactics, like Gravity Beetle zoning you out with his projectile game, Neon Tiger taking a page out of Vega's book with half the speed, and Blizzard Buffalo playing a few mind games of his own in a similar fashion to Tunnel Rhino. They can be daunting at first, but once you've figured out their patterns and how to react to their desperation attacks, they aren't too bad, although Vault Catfish continues to be a bit of a problem for me personally. But what makes these bosses so blasted scary is the fact that all of them can hit like a bulldozer despite the majority of their patterns being recognizable. So until you get that chest upgrade, you can't afford to take any of these Mavericks too lightly, despite how easy some of them may appear. But of course, that difficulty gets tossed right out the window when their weaknesses are factored in. Unlike how it was handled in X2, where the weaknesses are not so much an automatic W for a majority of the fights, it's the complete opposite here. You can make light work of just about every Maverick once you start nailing them with their favorite special weapons to the point where the threat level is non-existent. It almost made me feel sorry for how badly these weapons really hindered these guys. Well, everyone except Blast Hornet. Look, fighting this guy without his weakness is a nightmare, but not for the reasons you may think. Anytime he spawns a bunch of these small hornets, it causes the performance to drop and screw up my timing, whether it's missing a fully charged buster or getting hit for free. This is like fighting someone online who's periodically turning on their lag switch whenever they know they're about to lose. So since he cheats, I'm gonna cheat and make him suffer. As for their special weapons, these are a bit of a hit or miss for me personally. While I love the Triad Thunder, the Parasitic Bomb, and the Spinning Blade for making real quick work of these enemies, I can't say the same for the others like the Tornado Fang, Acid Burst, and the Gravity Well, which is a huge letdown since it's supposed to be a powerful space weapon. Seriously, how do you mess that up? The only time I will say where the boss difficulty truly kicks in is when you need to fight Sigma. His first form can be dealt with by hugging the walls and spamming the spinning blades, but when he enters his second form, you need to dodge and land them headshots like your life depends on it. All of Kaiser Sigma's attacks deal a hefty amount of damage despite X being armored up, plus Sigma's hurt box is a little more on the deceptive side. I know I said headshots is the way, but you really want to aim your buster shots towards the top of his body instead. It may take a few attempts to defeat him, but with enough patience and good positioning, it can be done. Just don't do what I did and lose a life during the chase sequence. You'll have to start the entire gauntlet all over again if that happens. Or you can make your life a lot easier and just slap him with the Z-Saber twice and calling it a day. The Z-Saber is your secret weapon this time instead of a signature move from Street Fighter. In order to get this one, you need to make sure Vile is destroyed before entering Doppler Stage B, then right before you face the mini-boss, you need to switch over to Zero and have him destroy it. The bug will slowly crash into Zero, making him look like a chump, and due to how severe the damage is, he'll be unplayable for the rest of the game. However, you'll be able to acquire the almighty Z-Saber as a trade-off, and it's definitely worth getting. With the Z-Saber, you'll be able to take down every boss with 2 hits, whether it's done by the projectile or the saber itself. Best part is, you don't need to be at full health in order to use it either. All you gotta do is charge up your buster to its 4th stage and let it rip once you've used your previous charges. Not only you can imitate Zero's double Buster Blade Beam combo, although it's slower in comparison. You even get to see this judgment cut animation if the projectile lands on an enemy with a lot of health. I especially love it when I hit Mavericks with the saber as a killing blow, since you don't hear the usual sound effect when the bosses take damage, just a brief humming sound the saber will make when it's swung. It almost turns X into an assassin, letting the saber be the last thing the Mavericks hear before they're severed in two. Of course, the caveat is that by acquiring the Z-Saber, you're permanently locked into the bad ending where Doppler sacrifices himself to destroy the Sigma virus instead of Zero destroying him with the antibody. Now there is one last aspect I need to bring up, and it's the fact that out of every X title, this is the one that was remade the most. Besides the SNES version, which can be experienced in the X Legacy Collection, there was also remakes on the PS1, the Saturn, PC, a bootleg on the Genesis, and a fan hack made by Justin 3009. Since I've only played the PS1 and the fan hack, I'm only going to talk about those. The PS1 version is almost no different from the original, with a slight graphical upgrade to certain effects, and featuring several animated cutscenes along with an enhanced soundtrack that uses real instruments this time. But unlike how the remastered tracks were handled in X Maverick Hunter, where I didn't like a majority of them, I did enjoy a good number of them in the PS1 version of the game. Now I should note that not all of them are good, these just happen to be my favorite ones. As for the fan hack known as the Zero Project, I will say without a doubt that this hack is the definitive way to play X3, as it fixes a lot of issues I've addressed with the original. To avoid spoiling it for those who want to be surprised, I'm going to speak very little of it here, but all you need to know is that Zero is fully playable with additional features added to his kit, and X even had a few quality of life fixes added to his overall playstyle. Plus, the ROM addresses the problem with how to go about collecting the items in the game. I'll include a link in the description below where you can experience this ROM hack for yourself to see why it's held in such high regard. X3 is a game that tried to raise the stakes and really test the skills of fans who enjoyed the first two games. It had so many collectibles, enemies and bosses that gave you a run for your money, Zero is playable, and even had different outcomes based on what you did throughout your playthrough. However, all of these things come with some kind of double-edged sword. Most of the collectibles outside of the hearts, armors, and sub-tanks is just bloat that becomes irrelevant as soon as they're discovered, especially in the case of the enhanced chips, since you can just play the long game and nab the best ones that give you every benefit with no downsides, save for the mac and cheese armor. Beefing up enemies or making them hit like trucks is a guarantee to make any game more difficult. However, I feel like the enemies are a bit overtuned here, and in many cases it can get pretty annoying to deal with them and can potentially bog down the experience. And Zero himself is an underused gimmick that serves as an upgrade for X. With how little you're able to use him, one has to ask why even bother to make him a playable character. This is one of those cases where we see a lot of really cool ideas, but they needed to be executed better. Honestly, it would have been beneficial if some of these ideas were dialed back and saved for another game. After all, there is such thing as overcooking a product. However, for what it is, X3 can still be an overall fun experience. Is it flawed? Hell yeah. Will it frustrate you? Absolutely. But even with all the misplays, the game is still decently put together and could provide a good challenge for those who want to bang their head against the wall a few times. Though if you really want to do that, Megaman and Base has you covered. That's a video for another time. Anyway, that concludes our visit with X3. I want to thank all of those who stuck with me to the end, and you're all magnificent gems for doing so. Feel free to hit that subscribe button and like the video so we can keep hunting down those Mavericks. And stay tuned as we'll have one last video in this mini X marathon before we give the hunting a break. I hope I get to see y'all there. Later!